We've got Rangers, we've got Blackhawks, and we've got a special Locked On crossover edition with Jack Bushman of Locked On Chicago Blackhawks.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1438 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your live bets all season long. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. So yeah, going to go ahead, have a special crossover edition for you guys here today. Going to be talking with Jack Bushman of Locked On Chicago Blackhawks. Going to be discussing the Blackhawks, up and down start to the season, as well as their rebuild overall. Going to be talking about the Rangers as well. Are they, in a good position? Have they turned a corner here with their recent strong stretch of play? Going to be discussing that, having some predictions, some players to watch, the whole 9 yards. So enjoy this crossover edition with Jack Bushman of Locked On Chicago Blackhawks. All right, so let's go ahead and kick off this very special crossover edition of Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On Chicago Blackhawks. This is John Chick with Locked On New York Rangers, joined by my good friend Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks. And Jack, I got to start with Connor Bedard. I don't think there's really anywhere else that we can start. Obviously the former first overall pick, and his first 2 years were fantastic. I think you'll sign up for that, from a teenager any day. But this year, man, just taking it to a whole nother level, 18 goals, 22 assists through 29 games. So as a Ranger fan, I got to ask you this. What is it like to have a really high draft pick, really work out and really become a franchise player? The floor is yours, man.
Oh my gosh, it has been unbelievable to watch the leaps that Connor Bedard has made here in his third season so far. And yeah, maybe the first 2 years weren't necessarily the points or goal totals that people were expecting from Bedard when he was hyped up so hard as the #1 overall pick leading into that 2023 NHL draft. But if you actually watched the Blackhawks in 23, 24, and 25, which, listen, I wouldn't blame anyone if they didn't. That was a really bad team. But if you were watching, then you knew what Connor Bedard had in store. Yes, he had to make some changes to his game. Yes, he had to adjust a little bit, but he did that over the summer and ramped up on his off-season training, has taken his speed to another level. He's winning over 48% of his draws this year after being below 39% the first 2 years. So he's made strides in every aspect of his game and has turned into the generational player that if you watch the Blackhawks the last 2 years, you knew he was eventually going to become. And for him to turn into that, elite level player that we thought he was going to be coming into that draft year, for him to actually become that now has just turned the tides of this entire franchise and made the Blackhawks so much more exciting. He's obviously done a fantastic job of helping this team be a lot more competitive than they were the last 2 years. So yeah, it's been spectacular to see just the growth, not only in, the point totals being up in the leading scorer race along with, Nathan McKinnon, Macklin Celebrini, but it's also just the way he's going about his business too. And there were, some shots thrown his way from, the TNT broadcast, some of the most prominent NHL content creators about him, playing quote unquote pond hockey, not a big boy style. Well, he's definitely changed that in year 3 as well, as he's been feistier than ever. He's been more involved defensively, has done a really good job, I think, using an active stick on the forecheck to help create more offensive chances for himself. And with that new addition of his speed and with that special release, it's all culminating into him becoming one of the most talented players in the entire league. And John, it has been beautiful to watch unfold in front of all of us Blackhawks fans' eyes and has us all, so excited about what this kid is going to. It's crazy to think in 4 years, he's going to be 24 years old. The future is so bright for Connor Bedard. He's still so young into his professional career, and he's already crushing it at a high caliber level and putting himself into some very special conversations alongside the top players in this league.
Yeah, the funny thing, I never really understood like when people would like criticize him the way that they did like in his first 2 seasons. Cause I mean, you're talking about a teenager and like, I'm sorry, he's not a Hart Trophy winner, right out of the gates here, but obviously, he produced at a high level and, the Blackhawks team in general was struggling quite a bit back then. They've gotten a little bit better, which actually leads me into the next thing that I wanted to ask you about. Blackhawks, kind of started hot this season, or at the very least, I think maybe were playing better than a lot of people thought that they might coming into this season. But now a little bit of a skid lately, just 2 wins, I believe it is, in the last 10 games. And the last 2 games in particular obviously hasn't been good. I'm sure you've talked about it. 13-1 combined, goals against to goals for against, I think it's the Kings and the Ducks. So, I mean, is this a team that's coming back to earth here, or is this just kind of a rough patch where you think that they can actually, stay in the race this year and maybe even make a run to one of those last couple of playoff spots?
What's weird, John, is I kind of think it's a little bit of both, because while the Blackhawks were bound to come back down to earth after an incredible start to the year that was really led by Spencer Knight standing on his head on a nightly basis. And listen, he's still been remarkable for the Blackhawks, but those that 930, 925 save percentage has started to come down a little bit, and he just hasn't been able to bail out the Blackhawks quite as much as he did in the early going. But at the same point in time, with the Blackhawks being such a young team, John, they have the 3rd youngest roster in the entire NHL. We knew these types of hiccups, these brutal stretches, that was just going to be a part of this team, because they don't have a lot of experience at this level, and they aren't all that familiar with, the grind of an NHL season where you're going to have these peaks and you're going to have these valleys. So I do think while the Blackhawks were bound to come back down to earth, they were being called the PDO Blackhawks on social media for a little bit there with the way their goaltending was playing at a high caliber and they were converting out a lot of their chances. But I also do think they are going to respond at some point in time. It's just how can this young team turn the corner as fast as they need to and put those brutal games that they just had this weekend to the side. That's really the challenge for this young team, particularly without captain Nick Foligno right now, who's one of the few veterans that they do have in that locker room. They're without him, and I don't think it's all that surprising that he's been out since November 15th. The Blackhawks only have 3 wins without him, and a lot of those losses, aside from the 2 this weekend, I mean, those were putrid, but most of their losses prior to that without Foligno have been in 1-goal games, and those were a lot of the games the Blackhawks were winning earlier on in the season. So I'm not all that surprised that they've kind of had this dip in their play without their captain, but we knew this was just going to be a natural kind of way the season progresses, right? We've seen the Blackhawks already have 2 5-game point streaks on the year, which didn't have many of those the last few seasons, but they've also suffered a handful of, extended losing streaks. So that's just kind of the nature of the beast with this young team. And for the Blackhawks side of things, we're hoping that this young group can kind of push those last 2 to the side and respond with a big one here in this original 6 matchup by putting their right foot forward.
Absolutely. And, going by, obviously your comments here and also just chatter that I'm seeing about, the Blackhawks on social media and whatnot, it does feel like collectively the fan base is feeling pretty good about the rebuild and where things stand. I mean, Bedard is obvious, but, somebody like Frank Nazar, another first rounder, it seems like he's off to a good start this season. How do you feel about just the rebuild as a whole? Like, are these young players, I mean, they're not there yet, maybe all the way, but obviously things seem to be coming together. I mean, how do you think things look as far as like, the state of this rebuild here?
Yeah, John, I would say one of the main things that I've learned about the Blackhawks through these opening 29 games is there cannot be a knock on Kyle Davidson's rebuild any longer. He has gone about this beautifully, and we're seeing obviously Connor Bedard take those strides. You just mentioned Frank Nazar. He's been in the second line center role, still only 21 years old. Sam Renzel just got sent down to Rockford yesterday, but 21 years old, former first-round pick. Oliver Moore, 19th overall selection in 2023. He's now up in the NHL. And then just taking a look at the prospect pool, John, I mean, Anton Frondell is thriving over in Sweden as an 18-year-old playing against grown men. 3rd overall pick last year. Artie Levshinov, 2nd overall pick in 2024. He's been the Blackhawks' best offensive defenseman this year. Roman Kanserov is maybe a prospect that outside of Blackhawks fans isn't, in the know too much, but as a 21-year-old, he's leading the entire KHL in goals and is on pace to be the first over point per game player as a 21-year-old in the entire league history. Marek Vanacker, first-round pick in 2024 as well, has 24 goals in 25 games in the Ontario Hockey League, leading the league. Nick Lardis, who's a 20-year-old in Rockford, is fourth in the AHL in points, leads all rookie scorers. So, like, this prospect pool is absolutely jam-packed. We're only seeing a fraction of the high-end draft selections that Kyle Davidson has made in recent years up on the NHL right now. That's what's making the Blackhawks very enticing, is because those kids are finally starting to arrive. But what's even more exciting as a Blackhawks fan is they're going to continue to arrive these next 3 to 4 years. And it's really starting to get to a point where it's like, what are we going to do with all these prospects? At some point in time, especially with the way the free agent market is just being knocked down nowadays with those rising salary caps, it's probably going to get to a point where the Blackhawks are going to have to be choosy with some of their prospects and make a tough decision to trade some of those guys for, bigger assets that can really help this team get to the next level. But there is no doubt at all, John, that the Blackhawks rebuild is on a real nice path. And it's just kind of a bonus that with some of the kids up in the NHL right now, the Blackhawks find themselves in playoff contention and are much more competitive than they've been in a long, long time.
Yeah, 100%. And one more question that I have for you, and then, we'll open up the floor to you. You can ask me a couple questions about the Rangers. Jeff Blashill, interesting coach or interesting decision, I should say, for your head coach. He was obviously with Detroit in the mid-2010s. Didn't have a lot of success there, although I don't know that anybody was winning with those teams. Those rosters were pretty barren back then. But, what was your reaction when he was the guy, and how do you think he's done so far? Your thoughts on him and how things are going there.
Yeah, my reaction over the summer, John, I didn't really love it all that much. I thought it was a good hire, and I understood why the Blackhawks went that route, but I wasn't necessarily thrilled with it over the summer. Could not have been more wrong. I have loved everything that Jeff Blashill has done right from day one. He came in on the opening day of training camp, set the, tone, and showed these guys that they're going to have to work out there in order to kind of turn the tides with the way things have been going these last couple of seasons. And they were doing conditioning drills, hard skating. The guys were exhausted on the opening days of training camp. And I think that's really reflected the attitude for most of the season from the Blackhawks this year as a very young group. And just kind of compared to some of the previous head coaches that the Blackhawks had, I just think Jeff Blashill really owns a room very well. In the way that he just talks, even if it's like speaking to the media, he just strikes me as a commander of men and is definitely, in my opinion, we're only 29 games into the season, but I don't think there's any arguing against Jeff Blashill being the best head coach the Hawks have had since Joel Quenneville all those years ago, and having a legitimate head coach who's pressed the right button so far and also is familiar with the rebuild from his time in Detroit, right? We just alluded to not a whole lot of winning going on there. Don't really think that we could pin that on Blashill, but experienced with kind of that level of where the franchise is at, and then going and spending 3 years with John Cooper, the longest tenured head coach in the league, with Tampa Bay, a club that really knows how to operate and has been there and done that. I've loved what Jeff Blashill has done so far. And well, obviously the jury's still out about whether he'll be the long-term coach for the Blackhawks. I've been very happy about how he's handled everything so far and really commanded that room. And to me, no question, the Blackhawks would not be in this position right now with the same team if they still had Luke Richardson as the head coach or maybe someone else. I think Jeff Blashill has done a phenomenal job at the start of his tenure with Chicago.
All right, and so in just a second, we're going to allow Jack to basically have the floor, and he's going to ask me some questions about the Rangers, and then we'll close out today's episode eventually by getting to some players to watch for both teams in this matchup, and probably doing some predictions as well. We'll get to all that good stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On Chicago Blackhawks is brought to you by Monarch. The holidays are amazing, but they can also get overwhelming fast. Travel, gifts, parties, year-end expenses. It's really easy to lose track of your money this time of year, and that's exactly why Monarch has become such a game changer. If you want to keep your finances under control this holiday season, you need to be using Monarch. Rated Wall Street Journal's best budgeting app of 2025. Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, simple dashboard. The holiday spending category can be a lifesaver. You can see exactly what's left in your gift and travel budget in real time. in minutes. You can check your net worth, link all your accounts, and keep track of contributions before deadlines. And it's great for couples, shared dashboards, shared goals, and fewer wait, how much did we spend types of conversations. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com in your browser for half off of your first year. That's 50% off of your first year at monarch.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, we also want to thank everyone for making Locked On Rangers and Locked On Blackhawks your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day, and now take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Rangers and Locked On Blackhawks with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. And obviously, we thank you in advance for your consideration to doing exactly that. And for the Everydayers, both shows going to be breaking down whatever happens in this matchup between the Rangers and the Blackhawks. And Jack, what do you got for me, man?
All right, first question I got for you, John. Can we play this game at Madison Square Garden? I mean, I gotta get down to the nitty-gritty of this one. I'm sure you've talked about it a ton on your podcast throughout the year. But coming into this matchup, the Rangers 15, 12, and 4 through 31 games. Currently has them second place in the second place wild card spot in the Eastern Conference, However, 3-8-3 record on home ice, 12-4-1 away from Madison Square Garden. Now, I got to get the breakdown on what's been happening with the Rangers here on home ice this year. John, tell me about it.
Yeah, that is truly the $1 million question, and we've tried to figure it out, and we have some educated guesses. That's probably about as good as I can do for, listeners of both podcasts here today. But what I think happened here, the Rangers, just generally speaking, got off to a little bit of a slow start this season, and they were particularly anemic at home when it came to not only scoring goals, but just even producing any kind of chances. They started this season with, at least at the home games, the 3 first home games of the season were all shutout losses. And I think what you've had since then is it's just kind of a snowball effect. And you have a situation where the crowd gets a little bit restless. I don't know if you've noticed this, Jack, but NHL games tend not to be on the cheap side, and that's especially true at Madison Square Garden. So, people are throwing down their hard-earned money to go and see this Ranger team play. And not only are they not winning, they're not even scoring goals, and they're not even creating chances. And I think that leads to kind of a restless environment in Madison Square Garden. Things have been a little bit better recently. They did go toe-to-toe with the Avalanche and Knights in the last 2 home games, albeit both overtime losses. But then I think on the road, it's sort of the opposite of that. This team shows some guts on the road, and they come together on the road. And I think that they're able to easier kind of adopt that us against the world type of mentality where, you go on the road, and I mean, that really is what's going on. And I think they kind of relish that opportunity of, shutting down a team in their barn. Because if you look at the Rangers this year, one thing they're very clearly doing better, especially compared to last year, I mean, they're doing pretty much everything better compared to last year, because last year was a disaster. But the biggest thing is just overall better team defense. This group of defensemen, I think, has really overachieved this season. They've done a heck of a job. Even with Adam Fox now out of the lineup, they've still been able to hold their own. And I just feel like on the road, again, there's something that just brings this team together. And, I mean, until this changes or starts to show any sign that it's going to change, as far as I'm concerned, every game can be on the road. And I mean, I'm happy to play this one in Chicago, man, because the proof is in the pudding. The Rangers have been a far better team on the road than at home for whatever reason.
Yeah, looking at that dispersion between at home and on the road is just mind-melting. 12-4-1 on the road is crazy. So the Blackhawks should know they're going to have their hands full tomorrow night at the United Center. But, John, you just referred to a couple of overtime losses that you had recently to Vegas and to the Colorado Avalanche. That's part of a nice 5-1-2 stretch for the Rangers since losing 4 games in a row, I believe, just prior to Thanksgiving. And obviously Adam Fox has been out for the first couple of games here of December. So how have the Rangers been able to continue on this nice run and even just respond from that losing streak? I know Fox was healthy for the first bit of it, but how have the Rangers been able to continue on that momentum without such a supreme part of their team on the back end?
Yeah, overall, I think it's a combination of things. Goaltending's been very well. Igor Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick. Yeah, shocking, right? Quick's obviously back. He was injured for a while. I think also there's just a lot of players on this team who, were mostly underachieving at the start of the year. And the Raiders right now, when you look at their roster, it's pretty top heavy. I mean, when you're talking about scoring for this team, you're looking at maybe 5 or 6 guys that you're really leaning on in terms of like, okay, we really expect this guy to produce offense at a high level. And after that, I mean, it's veteran role players, it's young guys that are coming along, and it's, fourth line grinder type players and, defensemen that aren't going to score all that often. So, you look at everything, and I feel like what's happened here is a lot of those players, those big name players, the high paid players that were underachieving at the start of the season, all those guys have found their game. Artemi Panarin, for the second time in the last 3 seasons, he shaves his head and immediately goes on an absolute heater because he had that really rough showing against the Devils in the playoffs. He comes back next season. He's bald, has the best season, one of the best seasons in Ranger history by any forward ever. And then this year goes through like a 5 or 6 game pointless streak, the longest streak of his career, shaves his head, and he's back. Now, look, I mean, obviously that's the mental side of hockey, but if it works, it works, and I'm not going to argue against it. But Panarin's obviously looked quite a bit more like himself. And JT Miller as well. He got off to a really rough start this season, just looked slow, looked like he was in pain out there. Probably because he was in pain out there, because he missed pretty much the entire preseason, only played 1 game. And I think at the start of the season, being the new captain, wanted to go out there and gut it out. He did that for a while, didn't look like himself, had to miss, I think it was 1 game or maybe 2, and has come back, and he's played more like himself. So, a lot of these guys that you really count on to shoulder the load, especially when you're talking about scoring, they've been able to do that. So, again, combination of things, but it all adds up to a team that's played a heck of a lot better since that 4-game losing streak.
We'll get to Buzz Cut Breadman here in just a second, John. But one player I wanted to ask you about in particular, since obviously y'all are on the East Coast, Blackhawks, Western Conference versus Eastern Conference. We don't get a ton of matchups against one another every single year. And I just kind of wanted to get your synopsis on Alexis Lafreniere at this point in time, because obviously a former number 1 overall pick, now 24 years old, coming off of a 45-point campaign last year, 57 the year prior. He's got 17 points through 31 games this season. Just for my Blackhawks fans who don't get to see a lot of Lafreniere, what kind of player has he turned into for the Rangers? Obviously, it's probably not what you wanted as a number 1 overall pick, but give me the breakdown on his game and his value to this team, even though he's maybe not the superstar y'all wanted him to be.
I'll answer that in just a second, but real quick, are you out on a Bedard for Lafreniere 1-for-1 trade here? Both number 1 overall picks. That's a fair deal, right?
Yeah, that one's going to voicemail real quick, and I might be turning on Do Not Disturb after that point to not get a second call back.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, as far as Lafreniere, look, I mean, it's year 6 now. I mean, he is still, I guess, relatively young. He's like 24 now. I think he just turned 24, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, you pick somebody first overall, you're looking for them to be a game changer, a big-time superstar player, if not a franchise icon. I mean, that comes with the territory when you're picked number 1 overall. When you look at that draft class, I mean, there was some love for guys like Quentin Byfield, maybe Tim Stützle, maybe even Lucas Raymond a little bit, but the consensus number 1 overall pick, for GMs across the league was Alexis Lafreniere. This is a no-brainer. Just pick the guy. You can't possibly screw this up. And, Lafreniere just hasn't become the player that we want him to be. And the part that drives you crazy as a Ranger fan is there are flashes of that. 2 years ago, he's on a line with Panarin and with Trocheck. No exaggeration, one of the best, most dangerous lines in the NHL. They make it to the conference final. Nobody can do anything against the Panthers. I mean, that's been the story of the playoffs the last 3 years. And Lafreniere is like taking on this entire team by himself and faking guys out of their skates and driving to the net and these nasty finishes. And you're thinking like, okay, this dude is here. He's arrived. We get a couple of games into the following season. Then he signs the big contract extension. And now we're kind of like right back where we were. And it's not to say that he's like this like worthless player, because some people will try to make it sound like that. But really, I mean, you're talking about a guy who right now just produces at the level of like a 3rd-line player. And again, that's not to say that he's useless or anything like that, but it's just like, geez, man, all the hype around him going number 1 overall, like, is this what we have to settle for? Just a 3rd rounder, like, or a 3rd-line kind of guy? It's unfortunate. You hope that, he scored a big goal in the last game, top shelf snipe that gave the Rangers the lead momentarily. Maybe that gets them going a little bit, but yeah, overall, I mean, I don't think it's even slightly unfair to say, that it's been a disappointment thus far in Lafreniere's career, with some good flashes occasionally mixed in.
Last question I got for you, John, is regarding Buzzcut Artemi Panarin. Obviously, there's been a lot of chatter about what's going to transpire with his future. Been a point-per-game player once again for the Rangers this year, 32 points through 31 games. Obviously, there's a long way to go, but what are kind of your expectations when the time does come this season with Panarin and the Rangers moving forward?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to this, because To begin with, I feel like the Rangers right now are sort of in wait and see mode. They want to see how this season plays out before they do anything rash, either whether that's an extension or you approach him about a trade, because he does have a full no move clause. I'll occasionally on my show, there will be comments in the YouTube section, I'll just trade Panarin now, sell, sell, sell. And it's like, well, the Rangers are in the mix. They're clearly not going to do that. They went for a reload rather than a rebuild. But if we get to the trade deadline and the Rangers are still on the outside of the playoff picture looking in, I know they have technically the second wild card right now, but there's teams with games in hand behind them. If they're on the outside looking in, then I think that's something that they need to consider. They have to go to Panarin and see if he'd be willing to waive, because you get a heck of a lot for him. And I think the way things stand right now, when you look at next year's free agent class, I mean, he is getting a little bit older, but I still think he's the best player that's going to be available. It's a tricky situation. I think in a perfect world, maybe the Rangers could get Panarin to agree to some sort of a discount at maybe just like a 2 or 3 year extension where you don't have to go nuts with it. But at the same time, like, Panarin's under no obligation to do that. He's like just about every other player in this league. Most players, not all, but most of them, they're going to go to the highest bidder. They're going to go to the place where they get the longest contract, the contract for the most money. We'll see what happens with Panarin. I feel like him and his camp are probably strategically keeping their cards close to the vest right now. But again, it all depends how this season shakes out, whether you look to extend him at the deadline, trade him at the deadline, or if you can't do an extension. If the Rangers are in playoff position, then I think you roll through the deadline with him still on the team and get to the playoffs, hopefully, and then you cross that bridge in the offseason, whether he's able to come back to this team or not. But it's a fascinating storyline to track, and one that I'm sure we'll all keep our eyes on moving forward.
Oh, definitely. With the way that dominoes have fallen off from the 2026 free agent class thus far, I agree with you. Panarin probably is going to wind up being that prize jewel should he end up on the free agent market.
Yeah, it's rough, man. That was going to be like an all-time free agent class, not just in hockey, but in sports. And we can't have any fun. Everybody re-signs with their current team, and here we are. Yeah.
It's the way it works. Works in hockey. These guys are all too loyal to their teams.
Yeah, that might be it. That might be part of it. But we'll keep everything rolling in just a second here. We'll get to some players to watch. We'll get to some predictions, and talk about who's going to win this game.
Real quick, though, I got to talk to you all about another one of today's sponsors here on Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Rangers, which is FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. But that's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. And with FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, and every highlight moment. And live betting is best when the game starts to shift, when a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. And FanDuel lets you jump right into the moment so that you can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked in into every snap, every drive, and every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of all the action this season, go and visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you.
All right, Jack and I will go ahead and wrap up today's special crossover edition by, talking about some players to watch, throw in a prediction or two as well. But, Jack, there's actually one more player I got to ask you about real quick here. And in a way, it kind of goes with what we're going to talk about, because I'm going to ask you about under-the-radar players to watch, but a player that was sort of under the radar a couple of seasons ago when the Blackhawks acquired him was Spencer Knight. A little bit of a reclamation project, and not great last year, but this year, off to a good start. 9-6-5, 262 goals against average, 914 save percentage. He was part of the Seth Jones deal. Is this like a buy low window here that the Blackhawks pounce on that has a chance to pay off? And what are your impressions of Knight so far?
Yes, that deal is awesome. And listen, it was awesome for Florida too. Seth Jones went and played over 23 minutes a game, I believe it was, to help Florida win a second consecutive Stanley Cup title. So in hindsight, I do think that's a deal that they feel okay about making. But the fact that the Blackhawks sure look like they now have their number one goaltender of the future here in Spencer Knight, who's still only 24 years old, but it's really his first opportunity to be a number one goalie in this league. After being a high first-round selection by the Florida Panthers all those years ago, he was just kind of stuck backing up Sergei Bobrovsky as he found his footing in recent seasons. And Knight is in a first-time spot as a number one goalie has just been excellent for the Blackhawks, really on a nightly basis, man. I don't think I can name a game off the top of my head where Knight didn't have his best stuff. Like, had one kind of shoddy game against the Winnipeg Jets a few weeks ago. If you go and look at the stat sheet from Saturday's game, it says he gave up 6 to the the struggling offensive Los Angeles Kings there. But I don't think really you can blame him for any single loss that the Blackhawks have had this year. And in fact, it's been the opposite. He's really kept Blackhawks in games more times than not. And to get that level of a player who's still only 24 years old, along with Florida's unprotected first-round pick, which I don't think at the time Florida was all that worried about giving away an unprotected first with how deep they are, but no Matthew Tkachuk. He's been skating here recently, but no Alexander Barkov for the entire season. It's like, whoa, what could this pick wind up turning into for the Blackhawks? So to get that pick, potentially adding even more fire to this stacked prospect pool that I already talked about earlier, and Spencer Knight, outstanding trade made by Kyle Davidson. And Knight, as I've already said, it has really been incredible for the Blackhawks, and they signed him to a 3-year extension just shy of $6 million, which, with the way the cap is going up, looks like an excellent deal to me. So yeah, 2 thumbs up for sure from me, and I think a majority of Blackhawks fans on Spencer Knight's start to the season.
Yeah, I mean, so far so good this year for Spencer Knight. I think you would have to say for sure. Any under the radar players to watch on the Blackhawks? Just 1 or 2 names that, maybe especially for us Ranger fans, we're in different conferences, we don't see each other all that often. Is there somebody that maybe we're not like super familiar with who you think can make an impact in this game? Somebody that's impressed you lately?
Yeah, definitely someone who's impressed me all year long, John, is Tyler Bertuzzi, who was part of that Red Wings rebuild when Jeff Blashill was there. So those two were familiar with one another. And Bertuzzi was kind of known as a little bit of a slow starter throughout his career, John. And what's kind of funny, I think if you look at Tyler Bertuzzi, you could see why. He seems like he's a guy who just loves to have a good time. And I'm sure his off seasons are a lot of fun. He likes to keep it loose. But there was a added intensity behind Bertuzzi getting off to a better start this year, and boy, has he done that. Just under a point per game player for the Blackhawks so far this year, and has 8 power play goals on the season, has clicked really well in a net front role along with Connor Bedard. He's actually been nicknamed the human backboard, John, because this guy will just go and stand in front of the opposing goalie, and Bedard's just throwing centering feeds off him, whether it goes in off his stick, his shin pads, his skates, whatsoever. That he's turned that into a strength of his. But along with the feistiness and how he can get under opponent's skin and stepping up for teammates and mixing it up in the corners and providing a little bit of an edge, which the Blackhawks don't have a ton of with this very young team in so many different ways, Tyler Bertuzzi has been outstanding this year. And I think Connor Bedard has probably gotten a lot of the attention. So has Spencer Knight in between the pipes. But man, Tyler Bertuzzi has been just as essential as each of those 2 guys. So he's definitely someone a little under the radar that New York Rangers fans, I think, should be keeping an eye out for tomorrow. And not to kind of steal your thunder here, John, but I'd be very interested to hear your answer to that same question for my Blackhawks side of things. Who's one sneaky player that's, been really effective for the Rangers this year that maybe isn't getting the attention they deserve?
Yeah, I will say Vladislav Gavrikov. He's somebody that I think Ranger fans certainly appreciate. And he's somebody, like, it's not like people haven't heard of him. Like, people know who he is and whatnot. And obviously he played for the Kings and was in your conference for a while there. But, I mean, man, this guy has just been so important to this team. We talked about the Adam Fox injury a couple minutes ago. And, the Rangers, when you lose one of your top players, you lose the best player that you have at a position. People need to step up. Gavrikov has done that, but really Gavrikov has been awesome the entire year. Just somebody that has been completely as advertised. The Rangers had precious little cap space to work with this offseason. Outside of Gavrikov, I think their biggest free agent signing was like Taylor Radish, and he was just a healthy scratch.
Blackhawks legend, Taylor Radish.
Blackhawks legend. Dude, I reached out to you. I remember that.
You did, yes. We had a good chat on Taylor.
We did. So yeah, I mean, so that'll give you an idea. They kind of put all their eggs in the Gavrikov basket. And when you're looking at a team in the Rangers that, they lost 3 of their top 4 defensemen for this last era of Ranger hockey here. No more Lindgren, no more Trouba, no more K-Andre Miller. So when you can only make one splash in free agency and you're doing it at a position where you're kind of thin anyway, you got to get it right. You got to, hit the nail on the head. And they did that. Gavrikov came over. There's not like a ton of flash, although he has tied his career high in goals already this season with 6. So that's been a pleasant surprise. But more than anything, this is somebody that just does not make mistakes. He's very, very under control out there. There's just kind of a comforting feeling when he's on the ice that opportunities are going to be limited. He's going to defend the blue line well. He'll defend the front of the net well. He's not like a big hitter, but he will use his frame to, win puck battles and whatnot. So he's been awesome. He's somebody that I think Ranger fans have really warmed up to in a short amount of time, myself included. He's been fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen he's been known as a really good defensive defenseman these last few years, but I've seen the increase in offense that he's put together this year, which has definitely, I'm sure, helped without Adam Fox. So, yeah, Blackhawks fans, keep an eye on Vladislav Gavrikov tomorrow night at the UC.
Yeah, for sure. And I figure one more thing before we call it here, Jack. Do you want to throw out like a prediction as far as like a final score or somebody to score a goal in this game or anything of the like?
Yeah, I'll go with a final score, goal scorer combination. I do think the Blackhawks, maybe a little biasly here, my bad. I will say they bounce back, get back on track after two, absolute stinkers, which have not been something the Blackhawks have had this year. They've been so competitive throughout the course of the season, and that's, the fan base has to respect that because this team was unwatchable for a long, long time. Not the case this year. I'm going to go 4-2 final for the Blackhawks at the United Center tomorrow, and I'm going to go with Oliver Moore, the first-round pick in 2023. He's up on the second line, playing with Tyler Bertuzzi, who I just mentioned a moment ago. Frankie Nazar, center in that second line. Haven't, really been all that good these last two games, but then again, who has been good for the Blackhawks these last two games? And prior to that, I thought they had some really strong showings together with Nazar and Moore's speed. I think they can be a very effective duo together. I'm going Oliver Moore gets what I believe would be his third NHL goal tomorrow night in this original six matchup.
I'm going to go with the same score, but I'm going to say the Rangers win it 4-2. This game makes me nervous, though, because the Rangers over the weekend into basically heavyweight fights with the Avalanche and the Knights. Went toe-to-toe with those teams. And other than the first period against the Knights, I thought they played very well pretty much from start to finish in those games. Both games, going into overtime. And I don't know. The Rangers, to me, they seem like a team that kind of gets into a rhythm. And right now, you've got this weird thing with the schedule, and the Blackhawks are going through the same thing where, off Monday and Tuesday, play Wednesday, and then 2 days off going forward. So I don't know that that's great for the Rangers, just based on what I've seen from this team. But I will say 4-2 win for the Rangers. They do play better on the road, as we talked about. And I'll say JT Miller for the game-winning goal. He's heating up. And even when he was kind of cold this season, the goals he was scoring tended to be big goals. So I'll say JT Miller with the game-winning goal in the third period.
All right, sounds good, John. Hey, I'm guessing Igor Shesterkin's going to be in the pipes tomorrow, right?
Oh, yeah. Quick played the last game, and he played very well. But it's the Igor show, man. They got to lean on him pretty hard right now, I think.
Awesome. Should be a good goaltending battle between Spencer and Igor. Looking 100%, forward to it.
And definitely looking forward to it. And Ranger fans, Blackhawk fans, thank you guys as always for tuning in. And we'll catch you guys next time.